Hello, I'm David Westbay. I will be reading Heaven Sent by John McCollum. Clifford had never smelled anything like it in the 6 years he had been hunting in the woods surrounding his home in rural southern Indiana. And it should be noted that Cliff, a connoisseur of all that was olfactory, had smelled some pretty funky stuff in his day and rolled on most of it, much to the chagrin of his best friend John. John tended to lean toward fragrances like Old Spice, but Cliff preferred odor de rancid. He was, after all, a dog who had inherited his size and sense of smell from his father, a big gangly bird dog, who had come to know his mother in spite of her owner's designs, and his good looks and brains from his mother, who was a prize-winning golden lab. Notwithstanding his bulk, he moved like a shadow through the thick underbrush surrounding the deep hollow, which was the source of the mystifying fragrance, a fishy, lizardy, decomp smell that was, to say the least, unique. The only thing that even came close was the several-day-dead water dog, a large aquatic salamander, he had found baking on a sunny rock next to Big Indian Creek the summer before. That particular find had led to 3 baths, one of which had involved an unusual concoction containing lemon and tomato juice. And he had still ended up sleeping in the garage for a week. Nevertheless, it had been worth every minute. This odor? Well, it promised to be that, and so much more. A more familiar and much more despised scent wafted across his path, however, dampening his enthusiasm for tracking down the alluring aroma. Coyotes. 2 of them, a male and a female, a mated pair. Their presence was confirmed when their unmistakable hunting call pierced the silence of the wood. This was soon followed by the sound of a vicious struggle. Clifford's sought-after prize was not as dead as it smelled, but in all likelihood was going to be very soon. Cliff hated coyotes and was tempted to challenge them for their quarry. He was more than a match for one of the loathsome creatures, but 2 he wasn't so sure about. And the females? The females could be a real problem, especially if they had a den of pups nearby. Since death, or worse, like a trip to the dreaded vet's office, was too high a price to pay for even a great roll in decay, Cliff elected to go home. Something that he didn't hear, however, stopped him dead in his tracks. There was no sound, but a shrill cry resonated through his little doggy brain, a cry that screamed out in terror and pain, screamed out for succor in the universal language of thought. Help me. It hurts. Biting, tearing, killing me. Help me. Hurry. Something in that urgent plea triggered an abrupt change in Clifford's instinctual response, from flight to fight. He pushed all thoughts of home from his mind and instead plowed through the tangled brush, toward the sound of the conflict, until he reached the edge of a steep rocky slope which descended into the hollow. Here the undergrowth thinned, and Clifford had a panoramic view of the scene unfolding below, where, not 50 feet from his vantage point, the coyotes had their prey backed up against a small outcropping of limestone. Their prey, a most unusual creature, stood upright on its hind legs like a human. Also like man, it had covered itself in cloth. There, however, the resemblance ended. The creature had a height advantage of maybe a couple of inches over its assailants, while its large, black, lidless eyes and smooth, hairless, speckled skin, combined with the long, flat tail, were much more reminiscent of the water dog that Clifford had recalled so fondly moments before than man. In one of his paws, the water dog man held a jagged shard of metal with which he was attempting to defend himself against the relentless assault of the coyotes. This had been met with very limited success, as attested by his weakening efforts and the thick black ooze that drenched his clothing and smelled vaguely of blood. His continued survival would require a miracle, and soon. Said miracle covered the distance between himself and the combatants in a matter of seconds. Using his superior size and strength, Cliff bowled over the nearest of the coyotes, the female, who went down yelping in surprise. Snarling, he lunged for his foe's throat, but the coyote, her reflexes honed by years of survival in the wild, twisted away at the last second, and Clifford buried his fangs deep within the flesh of her shoulder instead. He bit down hard, shaking the coyote like a rag doll, until muscle and tendon tore from bone, and she tumbled away, landing in a quivering heap. Struggling to her feet, the injured coyote turned to face her nemesis. Head down, her eyes locked on Cliff's, there was no evidence of fear in her demeanor. In spite of the gaping shoulder wound, a deep growl issued from her throat as she prepared to attack. But that attack never occurred. From behind Clifford came a sharp howl of pain, which shattered both his and his opponent's concentration. With a jerk of her head, the coyote stole a glance over Cliff's shoulder, and what she saw ripped the fight right out of her. Voicing a long, piercing wail, she turned, tail between her legs, and ran up the side of the hollow, disappearing into the forest. Spinning around, Clifford was greeted by an unexpected sight. The water dog man, no longer outnumbered, had managed to drive his makeshift weapon deep into his adversary's left eye. The sharp point had penetrated the coyote's brain, and the creature had died almost instantly. There had been time for that one last death scream, and nothing more. Swaying on his feet, the water dog man stared down at the corpse. A brief, sorrowful thought flashed across the big dog's mind. He let the fire of his hunger overrule reason, and now the flames have consumed us both. He then looked deep into Cliff's eyes with those cold, unblinking orbs, and the canine could feel the waves of gratitude washing over him. Thank you, my friend, but I fear your valiant efforts were in vain. With that, the water dog man collapsed to the ground. Cliff ran to his side and nudged the still form with his nose, whining softly as he did so. You dying? Yes. Help you? No. My injuries are too great, and I will soon be joining my ancestors in the warm embrace of the endless river. I have but one final request, that you remain with my body, protecting it until my people come. Will you do this? Yes. The promise made, Water Dog Man shuddered, and all thoughts ceased to flow. Clifford laid down by his side and waited. Cliff spent the rest of the day and most of the night fending off the scavengers attracted to the Water Dog Man's body. Luckily, there were no more coyotes, but several rats and a possum met their end in Clifford's jaws before his vigil was through. The Water Dog Man's pack arrived just before dawn in a big glowing ball that dropped out of the sky. Somehow, they were aware of all that had transpired and were very grateful for Cliff's efforts on Water Dog Man's behalf. Before they gathered up the Water Dog Man's remains and departed back into the heavens, the pack granted Clifford his choice of two gifts, anything he desired that was within their ability to give. Cliff made his decision without hesitation. The first was for a dog biscuit. Clifford was addicted to the doggone things and could never get enough. The pack was not only able to come up with something that looked and tasted like a dog biscuit, but also presented him with a small box, which provided Cliff with an unlimited supply of the mouth-watering treats on demand. After eating himself sick, as dogs were wont to do, he buried the box for safekeeping. His second request was a bit more problematic for the pack at first, but they relented after concluding that the water dog man himself couldn't possibly object. He was dead after all. His belly full and smelling better than ever, Cliff made his way home. He was anxious to get there and planned on taking a very long nap, most likely in the garage again, but hey, it would be their loss, once he arrived. Adventures. Life would be boring without them, but they really wore a good boy out. The end.